Welcome to Mid-Century Living, your weekly nostalgia podcast about the best of technology and culture from the mid-20th century.
Welcome back to Mid-Century Living, the show where we talk all about the best of the mid-20th century and how to add vintage vibes to your modern life. We're your hosts, Jackie
and Gonzalo. Thank you for joining us today. Today we are talking about something that I've wanted to cover since the beginning of this podcast, and that hopefully all you listeners out there find as exciting and interesting as we do. Pan American Airways. But first, Jackie, how was your holiday break?
My holiday break was great. It was very relaxing. I got a lot of stuff done. I did a lot of handmade gifts this year, which is why I couldn't talk about any of it before because I have family that listen to the podcast, but I made a dress for my niece and a little matching skirt from the same fabric for my newest niece, which I thought would be here by Christmas, but she came a little bit later, but we don't get to plan everything. I made my very own spiced rum. Like I bought rum and then spiced it myself and then turned that into rum balls and also put some of it in bottles for my dad and my brother-in-law. And I made cranberry bliss bar copycats, which is requested of me every year. And I think every year I get a little bit better at it. I made dulce de leche and put that in jars and gave that away as gifts. And then I also turned some of that into banoffee pie, which is something that I've always wanted to make because Keira Knightley mentions it in Love Actually. I don't know if it's technically a holiday dessert or not, but because she mentions it in Love Actually, I associate it with Christmas. But it was also featured on this season of the Great British Bake Off, which inspired me to actually make the pie. So basically I did a lot of baking and a little bit of sewing. I went and visited family, ate so much seafood, and I had a really great time.
That's cool.
How was your holiday break?
It was good. It was very family-centric. I have some family up in Chicago, and they come down. So my nieces were here, my sister, my brother-in-law, which was a lot of fun. Everyone got sick, which was great.
Oh, no.
I mean, I didn't get sick.
Oh, everyone else. Well, then that's fine.
But it was fun. It was like one would get sick, and then they would get better, and then the next person would get sick, and then they would get better, and then the next person would get sick. Oh. It was like a holiday gift train of mucus. No, but it was a lot of fun. We ate a lot. I celebrated 2 Christmases, one with my family, one with my girlfriend's family. I got a really cool pair of PJ pants that I'm wearing right now while we're recording. And I also baked a lot, but it wasn't for gifts. It was to eat.
No.
I'm eating pound cake that I made.
Was that made for Christmas or just because you were in the spirit of baking?
No, it was more like we were... What were we doing? Oh, we were cleaning my house's kitchen, purging, getting rid of stuff that doesn't get used. And I was like, you know what? I should make a pound cake. I don't know why, but I made it.
Yay.
And it was delicious.
Yeah, that is the fun part. I don't know. I just all of a sudden baking sounds like the most fun ever. I go through phases in general, where all I want to do right now is sew, and then I just make a whole bunch of projects back to back, or all I really want to do is experiment with hot dogs and hot dog recipes, and then in the summer it's I think seasonal. I have season triggers in my brain where all of a sudden I channel all my creativity into one specific niche, and baking is definitely the second the calendar flips to December, I'm like, what can I bake? Flour everywhere, buy all the things. It's
I like having people over, and I like hosting. So we had some friends over, and I made scones. And because I had oranges in my fridge, I made orange marmalade. And because I had heavy cream, I made clotted cream. And clotted cream, by the way, so good.
I've only ever had it at high teas that we've gone to at tea places.
It was I could eat it by the spoonful.
Yeah, I've never thought about just keeping it in the house.
I would probably get a stomach ache.
What an exciting idea.
Yeah. It's so easy to make, too. It just takes a long time.
You need to give me your scone recipe.
Okay, which one? The scone. I made the scones that you can split and put marmalade and stuff, but I also have a scone that's drier that you can put I put chocolate chips in mine. My mom does the same recipe but doesn't put anything in them.
The splitting one because I like a vessel for jams.
Yeah, they're a little bit softer and they rise a little bit more.
That one.
Do you have a pen and paper ready?
No.
Everybody else ready?
Everybody out there, get your pen. Let's learn how to make scones. But that we should save that for a different. Maybe that could be next year's holiday episode. I'm kidding.
There you go.
But or we could do Baking with Gonzalo, the new Instagram Reel series.
Yeah.
But anyway, we should probably get serious and get to our topic for today because we do have a really exciting one this week.
Yes. But before we start, we need to give a very special thanks to Mr. Tom Betty, host of the Pan Am podcast, and also the Pan Am Museum for their amazing help and support while we were researching for this episode. The Pan Am podcast explores the legacy of the world's most iconic airline, Pan American World Airways, through storytelling and conversations with Pan Am employees, passengers, pilots, and many more authorities on Pan Am. Stay tuned for an upcoming episode where we get to host Tom on our little podcast and talk about Pan Am with him. Also, special thanks to the Pan Am Historical Foundation as a huge source of research for today. Don't forget to check out their website. Links to all our sources will be found on our show notes.
Yes, and the Pan Am podcast really is great. It's got not only interviews, but sound clips from old radio commercials and news reels and everything. So if you guys are into Pan Am or just mid-century history in general, like we are, you definitely should check it out.
Yeah, definitely should check it out.
So really, the mid-century history of Pan Am begins with World War II, as many of our topics do. So Gonzalo, take it away as our resident history nerd.
Okay, let me put on my resident history nerd hat. So it all starts in the Pacific Ocean before World War II. Pan Am, or Pan American Airways Corporation, or really as it was known in the mid-century, Pan American World Airways Incorporated, or still Pan Am, was instrumental in setting up the USA for success on the Pacific front during World War II. Even before the war, Pan Am controlled the trans-Pacific routes. There's so much pre-war history of Pan Am, which is extremely interesting, but a little bit outside of our time frame. And I'd love to cover it. So let us know via fan mail or Instagram if you'd like to hear more about it, and maybe be on the lookout for a possible bonus episode in the future.
So what happened after World War II?
Okay, so this is when we start with Pan Am flying across the Atlantic. So post-World War II brought the challenge of transepting or crossing the Atlantic Ocean and establishing routes from the USA to Europe. So first flights across the Atlantic Ocean by a U.S. air carrier was the American Overseas Airline, or the AOA, which was an airline that operated between the end of the war and roughly 1950, when it was acquired by Pan American Airways. Prior to being sold to Pan Am, the AOA was a subsidiary of American Airlines, and for complicated reasons outside of the topic of this episode, operated under the name of American Export Airlines, or Amex, which I always thought was funny because it's the credit card.
Yeah.
Yeah. First services by AOA on routes from New York City to London were using the Douglas DC-4 aircraft, which is a very reliable airplane, but it was not pressurized, meaning that it could not fly very high up. So if you think like old-timey airplane, you're probably picturing the DC-4. And AOA started the first, quote, modern international flights on October of 1945 using this DC-4, one named the Flagship New England. All mid-century planes had names, which I think is fun.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. And this plane flew from New York City to Boston to Gander in Newfoundland, which is where the airplanes were diverted to September 11th.
Oh, interesting.
Shannon, Ireland, and then finally arriving in London.
So this might be old hat for you, but like, is it just because they had to refuel in all those spots?
Yes.
Or did the engines overheat or something and they had to take breaks? Or like, why did they have to make that many stops?
So refueling is one big thing, right? Because you can't carry all that fuel to cross in these little planes. But also, since you're not flying high up because you're not pressurized, and little tech talk right here, pressurized means that like the inside of the plane maintains the same air pressure that like being on Earth is, so you can breathe. The higher up you go in the atmosphere, the less you can breathe. So because these planes were not pressurized, they had to fly lower, which takes longer, right? There's, storms are lower. So that's why they had to do all that stops.
Interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, Pan American Airways reacted to the AOA flights by scheduling 7 of these aircrafts, DC-4s, per week to go from New York City to Europe. 5 went to London and 2 went to Lisbon, Portugal. And to London, it took 17 hours and 40 minutes. Oof. And to Lisbon, it took 20 hours and 45 minutes.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, that's a long... But I mean, you have a lot of stops.
Yeah.
At the same time, Pan Am was flying a Boeing 314 flying boat, which is an aircraft that takes off on land and water. And this ship was making the trip once every 2 weeks, taking 29 and a half hours to complete. These first transatlantic modern flights marked the end of the flying boats, though. So these DC-4s flying kind of put the end to the Boeing 314. But if you guys are somewhere that are not driving, I would recommend Googling the 314.
So we've mentioned a lot of airplane names by now, so I guess we probably should have mentioned at the top that there will be some technical talk on this episode, but don't worry, we're going to try to keep the technical mumbo-jumbo to a minimum, just to explain what we need to explain.
Yeah.
We will probably be posting pictures of all of these on Instagram so that you can see what we're talking about.
Yes. At around this same time that Pan Am is starting the transatlantic flying routes, another airline begins servicing these same routes. And this is the Trans World Airlines, or the TWA, which was operated by Howard Hughes. So TWA will introduce flights from the USA to Europe using a new aircraft called the Lockheed L049, or the Constellation, or also nicknamed Connie, which replaced the DC-4. TWA's first flight was October 1st, 1945, and it went from Washington, D.C. to Gander to Shannon to Paris. And on February of 1946, Pan Am will inaugurate commercial operation of their new fleet of Lockheed Constellations with one named the Clipper Mayflower from New York to Bermuda in 2 hours, 22 minutes. Later that same day, a second Constellation, commanded by Captain Robert D. Fordyce, began transatlantic service from New York City to London via Gander and Shannon as well. And that took 15 hours, 32 minutes, with about 12 hours of actual flight time, which is faster than the DC-4 was doing. So a little bit about this plane, because it's really cool looking. The Connie, or the Lockheed Constellation, is a propeller-driven, meaning that we're not yet in the jet engine age. It's the first civil airliner that had a pressurized cabin. So remember that because we have the same air pressure, we can fly higher, which makes it more comfortable for passengers, but also saves time. Because science. One of the most notable parts of the Constellation is a distinctive triple tail design. So the tail part of the aircraft, there's 3 of them. So little technical warning, but the empennage, which is the name for the tail section of the aircraft, usually has a vertical part, which is called the vertical stabilizer, where the rudder is, and the horizontal stabilizer, which moves up and down, pitching the nose of the aircraft up and down. And the Constellation has 3 of these vertical stabilizers. It was powered by 4 radial engines, and it was produced between 1943 and 1958. So 3 Constellations actually served as presidential aircraft for Dwight D. Eisenhower, and one is on display at the National Museum of the United States in Dayton, Ohio, which I want to go to so bad.
Go and report back.
Okay.
We really should be writing all these down, like all of these museums that we need to be going to for research for the pod, or just to like make all of this come to fruition. We should have a running list.
There's a time in my life where all my trips were centered around aircraft museums, and I would only go to places where there was an aircraft museum that I could visit.
I love that.
Yeah. Anyways, it was the success of the Lockheed Constellation by the TWA that prompted Pan Am Airways CEO Juan Trippe to seek a way to stay on top of the airline industry. Now, Trippe wanted to offer luxury crossing over the Atlantic to compete with the incredible ocean liner ships that were the norm for crossing between Europe and the USA.
We actually covered some of the great ocean liners like the SS United States on a previous episode, so if that sounds interesting to you, check out episode 40, Ocean Liners of the Mid-Century.
Yes, it was a really cool one, and the SS United States was on the news the other day, and I don't know if it was true or not, but we're not going to talk about it right now.
No, we're not going to talk about it until it's confirmed.
Yeah. Anyway, Boeing came up with a new model that had been proposed by then Boeing President William Allen in 1945. And this aircraft was a semi-double deck aircraft with distinctive stepless front. It kind of looks like a dome on its side. It's not the prettiest airplane, but also it's very like, adorable. And it had a 14-seat cocktail lounge located below the main deck, which actually is really cool.
Now that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I really wish that we had cocktail lounges on planes.
I wish that they had a place for you to get up and go to and sit in a different location. That
a lounge
even sounds more appealing than the cocktails in the lounge, just the idea of like not being tied to your seat the whole trip.
Yeah, it'd be kind of cool if like they like the 747s that have the cockpit above, like the nose should be glass.
Ooh. Yeah, we
Yeah.
should. They should ask us for, but they didn't ask us
I
for
know
how
they
to
really
design
should
inside
ask
them,
us.
but they
Boeing, you
should.
should ask us for input.
We have good ideas.
Yes. But anyway, back to this aircraft. This became the Boeing 377, also known as the Stratocruiser. And the Stratocruiser actually is a World War II Boeing B-50 bomber that was transformed into a commercial aircraft. Now, the first test flights were in July 8th of 1947, and it was powered by 4 propeller engines again, the ones that originally powered the B-50 bombers. And these were the most advanced and most powerful radial engines. Would become a source of pain, though, for Pan Am because of their unreliability and occasional loss of some of their 4 blades propellers.
Yikes.
Yes. Passengers to Hawaii on these aircraft often joke that they made it to the islands on 3, if not 2, engines.
Yikes.
But there were a lot of really cool features. So this is a very innovative aircraft, and the 377 include a pressurized cabin, like I mentioned earlier, a double deck configuration, and this is how Pan Am configured their 377s. So it allowed for a 100 passenger capacity on the main deck, plus 14 more in the lower deck lounge. And Pan Am operated mostly 47 or 61 configurations, which made them more roomy, meaning that room for 47 or 61 people. The main cabin was arranged in 2x2, so 2 seats, an aisle, and 2 seats, and was further split into mini cabins or staterooms at the front with just 8 seats. The rest of the main cabin, hold on, that makes no sense. The main cabin was arranged in 2x2, so 2 seats, an aisle, and 2 seats, and was further split into mini cabins or staterooms. So at the front, there were the staterooms with just 8 seats each, and then the rest of the main cabin was a 2x2.
So cool.
Yeah. Both cabins had space above the seats that pulled down and converted into beds, creating sleeping space for up to 15 passengers. And Pan Am even offered breakfast in bed. And they also partnered with French restaurant Maxime's to cater gourmet meals out of its galleys.
And more on that later in the episode.
Yes, I'm so excited. Pan Am is like, you think Pan Am, you think service. And I like hosting people, so I like service. Tripp ordered 20 Stratocruisers with the provision that Boeing would give Pan Am priority and give them the exclusive ownership of the plane until 6 had been delivered. Only after that could Boeing sell their aircraft to other airlines. And Pan Am paid $1.3 million for each. And in comparison, the Constellation cost $1.2 million, which is almost $23 million in 2024 times.
So we know how they were configured inside, but what did they look like? So Pan American Airways contracted with modernist designer Walter Dorwin Teague to design the interiors. They used muted colors and simple patterns. No busy floral prints, just gentle lines. The idea here is to maintain and be inside clean and simple so that when a passenger looks out the window and back inside, he isn't jarred by the contrasting imaging. Also, the big attempt by interior design in the Stratocruiser is to make the cabin look wider and taller, and basically designing it to avoid motion sickness.
That's smart. I wonder if that was a big thing back when people were starting to fly. Sorry to interrupt, but when they were flying, because like people aren't flying as usual. Like we started flying when we were little, so like I feel like we probably built up some immunity to motion sickness. But like if you've only ever traveled by car or like Greyhound bus, and all of a sudden this new medium and air, like you're up in the air and you're moving in all axes, not just up, left and right. I wonder if like motion sickness was a big deal.
Yeah, it probably got better and better as flights got smoother and the pressurized cabins got better and everything like that too.
Yeah,
Because
that's
if these
true.
are just bombers that they added chairs to, you've always seen the movies where like everyone's just sitting lined up on the side and it's all bumpy and shaky and like the walls are thin and everything's terrifying. Like if it was just that with a lounge chair in it, it was probably a bumpier ride. I'm sure they put a little bit more.
I think we just discovered that they put a little bit more more effort.
Well, I mean, but like eventually, as airplanes were designed, they like made the walls thicker and.
Oh yeah. And now I don't know if you guys for technical talk, but like modern airplanes, their wings move up and down, like not mechanically, but like they're designed with a huge amount of flexion, so that the wings move up and down, but the aircraft is more stable.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever seen like Google Boeing 787 wing stress test, and like there's a video of the wing moving up, like they're pulling it up, and like before it snaps, it's like a lot.
I didn't mean that they just slapped some chairs on a bomber and went about their day. I meant like just like think about the shape, like the inside to outside shapes of old planes, and as we get closer to the jet age and then to now, like they just get progressively more comfortable.
Oh yeah, that is true.
So I think that the earlier flights were probably pretty bumpy, but we know that they can pour tea and make eggs to order later, so spoilers for later in the episode, so it must not have been too bumpy.
Yeah.
But while we're talking about comfort, another Pan Am first was with the Stratocruiser was that air conditioning ran separately from the engines and systems that are usually off when the aircraft is docked, and this was to allow for the passengers who chose to stay in the aircraft's sleeping berths to be comfortable while they stayed there. Some of these berths could accommodate 2 people,
leading to some Mile High Club initiates. Even the aft compartment of the aircraft was dubbed the honeymoon suite.
So on March 5th, 1949, the Pan Am Clipper America sets a record for speed from San Francisco to Washington at 6 hours and 22 minutes. And the next day, the Pan Am Clipper Rainbow beats the record by 8 minutes, carrying 34 passengers and 6 Pan Am crew members. Nice. Side note, at around this time in January 1950, Pan American Airways became known as the Pan American World Airways, but still affectionately called Pan Am.
Yes.
Unfortunately, within 9 months of entering service, the Stratocruiser began to see its downfall. In January of 1950, one Pan Am Stratocruiser lost an engine, and in 1952, the first Pan Am Stratocruiser fatalities occurred. A propeller blade separated from the number 2 engine, which spelled disaster for the aircraft, which was not found until 3 days later, and the engine and propeller were never found. In October 1956, we have the most famous Stratocruiser incident when the Pan Am Stratocruiser Clipper Sovereign of the Skies, on its last leg of the round-the-world trip between Honolulu and San Francisco, had an issue with the number 1 engine propeller, which was unable to be stopped and created massive drag.
So what happened was the crew ditched the aircraft near the U.S. Coast Guard ship, the Pontchartrain, meaning that because they were over the Pacific, they had to put the plane down in the water because there's no runway. And they happened to be near a Coast Guard ship. So they put the ship down, the aircraft down, and all 24 aboard were rescued. And it was not really until Captain Sully landed on the Hudson in 2009 that there was another such water landing with everyone surviving. For those of you out there who may not be too familiar with aircraft incidents, landing in water is kind of like you really have no other option. Like you don't want to land in water. If you can, like if you want to crash, you want to crash on land, not on water, because it's more of a controlled environment. And this kind of was fixed in 1950. Well, not fixed. In 1958, an airworthiness directive was set by the Civil Aeronautics Board that ended the career of the Stratocruiser by outlawing its fatal flaw, a hollow propeller.
So that was why.
Yeah. Airworthiness directives are these really cool things that the government sets out. It says like this model plane needs to be having blah, blah, blah done to it. And you typically have so much time between it being issued until all planes have to do it. And that's still today. Like when the Maxes had the issue, I'm sure there was some sort of airworthiness directive that was set forth by the FAA.
Fascinating.
But more fun fact times. The 377 Stratocruiser lived on after its tenure as luxury passenger carrier ended. This was the birth of the Guppies.
Cute.
So, yes. Great name. This is a modification to the old Stratocruisers that had an extension on the top of the fuselage or the body of the aircraft to allow for large aircraft parts to be carried inside. This is how they moved pieces of aircraft back and forth when they were producing them or manufacturing them. But they had really fun names because Guppy is the name that they came up with. So they had the pregnant Guppy, the super Guppy, and the mini Guppy.
Cute.
Yes. And another fun fact, the end of the Boeing 377 Stratocruiser era led us to an exciting time for Pan American, or for Pan Am. Because aside from the Stratocruiser, the 1950s also brought out an exciting new way of travel to the air, the jet engine. And thus begins the jet age of Pan Am.
Dun-da-da.
I know. This would be a great time for a Pan Am song.
That soundboard we should have bought over Christmas break.
Yeah. So we can really thank the Havilland Common for pioneering pressurized cabin jet plane travel. This was a really beautiful plane with a lot of issues on it. But for more about the Comet, we've actually talked about it already in an earlier episode. And this was the first commercial jet airliner. And you can learn all about it in episode 3, the jet engine episode, link to which will be in our show notes.
Side note, I can't believe that was all the way back in episode 3. Like,
I know.
that's crazy.
Anyway, Pan Am considered purchasing the Comet in the early 1950s and actually placed orders for 3 Comet jetliners at an estimated cost of $6.3 million, or about $75 million in 2024 money. And this would have been the first time a US-based airline purchased foreign aircraft. And think of it, it kind of makes it even worse because Pan Am was or had become kind of like the de facto flag carrier for the USA. But as a warning to American plane builders, Juan Tripp said that the deal with de Havilland would allow for Pan Am to acquire a fleet if, quote, suitable American manufactured jet transports were not available, end quote. So basically, Pan Am was pressuring US manufacturers' competitive planes because in order for them to be competitive with British Airlines, Tripp had to have Pan Am jets ready.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah. And this is where the jet age of Pan Am really begins. So Boeing, which is an US plane manufacturer, develops what they call the 707. This is an aircraft which first flew on December 20th of 1957. And this was a long-range, narrow-body airliner, which means it can fly long distances and is very small. And this was the first jetliner developed and produced by Boeing. Its body allowed for 6 abreast seating in economy, something that Boeing will employ in its later 727, 737, and 757 models. Originally, it was powered by 4 Pratt & Whitney turbojet engines. And fun fact, Boeing chose the 700 series for the jetliners to differentiate between their propeller-driven aircraft, which was the 300 series. Like earlier we mentioned, the 377, which was propeller-driven, and the boats were the 314s. So like they were the 300s, and now the jet engines have the 700s. And they had to go to 7 because 400, 500, and 600 were all used by missiles and by military products.
Interesting.
Yeah. Pan Am began regular international commercial service on the 707 on October 26, 1958. The aircraft that flew this day was a Jet Clipper America, a Boeing 707 which flew from Idlewild Airport, today known as JFK, and bound for Paris. And it was commanded by Captain S.H. Miller and First Officer Captain W.W. Lynch, with flight engineer James W. Etchinson and navigator Captain A.O. Powell. The flight took 8 hours, 41 minutes, with a stop in Gander. It departed with great fanfare at 7 o'clock local time, with even the 42nd Army Infantry Division band playing. And another fun fact, this flight was reenacted 25 years later in 1983 with many of the original crew as passengers. And the Jet Clipper America was later renamed the Jet Clipper Mayflower.
Oh, there's a really cool brochure all about the 707 and Pan Am specifically using it and what their service was like and everything. That's very neat and worth looking at. We're going to link it in the show notes. Yes,
it's really cool. It's like mid-century drawings on it too. Pan Am also flew several other jet planes in the mid-century, though the Pioneer was a 707. Other Boeing planes in service, or other planes in service by Pan Am included the 720, which was a narrow-body 4-engine jetliner meant to be for shorter flights than the 707, and it was produced from 1957 through 1967. And notable Pan Am 720s were the Clipper Bonita, which I think was fun name, and also served as a pilot trainer aircraft in Roswell.
Cool.
The Boeing 727 replaced the 720 and was the only tri-jet aircraft made by Boeing, meaning that it had 3 engines, one under each wing and one mounted on the top part of the empennage or the tail section of the aircraft, and it's really cool looking. And then the Airbus A300, which was a non-US manufactured aircraft with 2 engines. Notable names for this one is the Clipper Detroit, which I thought was really cool because I like Detroit. And then, of course, the 747. Now, this is like the big aircraft. This is the plane that people our age, millennials, may picture when they think of Pan Am, a double-decker aircraft with 4 engines. And this plane really took aviation from the jet age to the global age that we are in now. There's so much to cover on this aircraft that it could be its own episode, and it is technically outside of our time frame because it's from the 1970s and 80s. But there is a really cool, notable Pan Am 747, the Clipper Juan Trip. This is the second ever made Boeing 747, which originally was named the Clipper America and changed its name to the Clipper Juan Trip later on in his career. But its tail number is really cool because the tail number in all U.S. aircraft always starts with the letter N. So this is the N747PA, like Pan American.
Cute.
It's really cool. Yeah.
Oh, that is very cool. But now that we're in the jet age and global age, and I think this is the time period where people like close their eyes and think of Pan Am, then I will take over with the fun stuff. So it's time to talk about service and fashion from the jet age of Pan Am. So Pan Am has always been synonymous with glamour, and its flight attendants lived their opportunities to the max. It was a career filled with luxury and international intrigue. They would go to Rome one day and Rio the next, and it was really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to learn about people, places, and cultures worldwide. I've got some quotes from former flight attendants who worked from Pan Am. So Carol Brown, who worked for Pan Am from 1969 to 1975, says that there was a pride in being part of Pan Am in the golden age. We were not just employees, but part of a team at the world's most experienced airline. The whole world knew Pan Am and the blue ball. We'd walk down the street or through the terminal and heads would turn. And then another quote from Rebecca Snyder Sprecher, who worked for Pan Am in the 70s, said, I think what gave Pan Am its cachet was the fact that over a third of its flight attendants were foreign nationals. We all flew together and we shared hotel rooms on lengthy trips, some as long as 10 or 12 days. You never knew whether your roommate was going to be from Singapore or France or Alabama. We had a unique global culture before anyone had ever heard of it. We embraced and celebrated our differences rather than fearing them.
I love that.
I do too. In addition to that, though, like they did have really high like beauty standards, and that's what we'll get to later. But it was also like it was very strict rules and kind of limiting in that way. But it was this incredible opportunity for people where the world is just starting to become smaller, where you can even meet anyone from a different country, like let alone work with them, go to all these places. Like it was an incredible opportunity for these girls, and it sounds like none of them really regret it because it was just, sure, it might have been hard work and hard standards to upkeep, but it seems totally worth it, and it was like an incredible opportunity they couldn't get anywhere else. So
yeah, there seems also to be like this, like you were part of you weren't just an employee of Pan Am, you were part of like the Pan Am family.
For sure. And that's a great transition into what Pan Am called its international standard of service. It was the idea that you want your trip to feel international and break your everyday routine, but at the same time you want enough familiar things that you can still feel comfortable and at home while flying Pan Am. So like the flight attendant earlier mentioned, Pan Am made it a point to hire lots of international flight attendants and ground personnel. The idea was that no matter who was flying, they could always speak to someone who spoke their language. From that 1960s jet brochure we talked about earlier, it says, cabin attendants are delighted to converse with you, answer your questions, and assist by providing information about customs, accommodations, and visas in your own native tongue. Wherever you go, the distinctive Pan Am insignia, along a worldwide symbol of faraway places and exotic lands, is also a beacon to things familiar and homelike. So it's a international and yet comfortable vibe. They had a very cool corporate culture I really liked. But can't talk about service without food chat. So
food talk.
All of the exciting what I missed the most, or what I'm mad I missed the most about this time period, is the incredible menus on these flights. So I'm sure like the regular food was good too, but I'm fixating mainly on the first class meal back then. It was a whole white glove presentation, from caviar to roast beef, cooked in tiny ovens on board, and the flight attendants even cooked eggs to order for breakfast.
That is cool.
It sounds incredible. So, as we mentioned earlier, in the late 1950s, Pan Am had Maxime's de Paris food catered in flight, including their famous beef entree. As their aircraft had their own ovens, there was usually a beef tenderloin cooked on board and sliced in front of you. The brightest child of this marriage of French tradition and American efficiency is the President's Service Special, operated between New York and London and Paris. So the President's Special was this incredible menu that had the highest standard of dining room elegance and a range of menu selections not found anywhere else aloft. I'm like doing wide gestures trying to explain how grand this is, but none of you guys can hear that in the radio, so you'll just have to imagine that I'm very excited. So we'll put a link in the show notes to an eBay listing that I found with an example President Special First Class menu from 1966. But if that listing is down, or if you would rather just hear me tell you about it, here's the whole menu verbatim. So it starts with hors d'oeuvres. It does not get specific about what they are, but then you have several entrees to choose from. There's filet of flounder in a brown butter sauce. Then there's roast filet of beef with bordelaise sauce, sautéed...
Beef bourguignon.
Thank you. Isn't that beef pronounced differently too? Like it's bouf?
Bouf.
Yeah.
Because in French it's B-O-U-E-F.
Yeah.
Bouf.
Grilled lamb chop with mint jelly and duckling with cherries. The sides are buttered garden peas and rice pilaf with mushrooms. There's also a mixed salad and your choice of cheese. And desserts are our selection from the cart and a fruit basket.
Screw the fruit. I want the dessert with chocolate.
They also had a really full bar. The actual menu lists all of the spirits that they had on board, but it's an impressive range. So there's 4 aperitifs, 6 specialty liqueurs, and also French wine and champagne selected specifically for Pan Am.
I am so upset that we don't have this.
I know! It sounds so cool.
The closest I can get to, I think of, is, I don't know if you've ever flown first international, like long trips, like overnight trips, where like you're waking up at midnight with like the Sunday
Ice cream
bar
Sundays?
cart.
Yes, I have.
I love
when
that.
I was a kid, when we flew to Europe, that's how we flew.
Yes.
And I remember, like, they actually do wake you up from slumber and ask you if you want an ice cream sundae.
Yes. Last time I did that trip, I was not feeling great.
Aww.
And I had to say no to the ice cream.
Aww.
But they still woke me up.
Yeah. But you do still get the first class treatment, and they do give you a menu and let you choose your entree.
Yes.
But they're not like this. Like, this is crazy. This is like you're sitting down in a restaurant.
Yes, the fact that they cooked on the plane, and not just cooked, like anyone can make like a grilled cheese, but like they are making like, I don't know, these gourmet meals that like Pan Am is going to be known for making. Speaking
of things Pan Am is known for, we can't really talk about Pan Am's like aesthetic and legacy without talking about their uniforms, which so their early uniforms are probably the most famous. Again, when you close your eyes and think of Pan Am, these are the uniforms you're probably thinking of. So it's a fitted skirt suit in Pan American blue. It's a slim skirt with a back slit ending about 1 inch below the knee. They also wore white button-down blouses under the jackets and pillbox hats with white piping. These are very cute, and they basically kept the same aesthetic for 10 years or so, and with just like changes to the jacket and skirt barely. So like the original ones had 4 buttons, and then they had like 2 sets of 3 buttons, and like as they got farther into the 60s, instead of it like tapering in the waist as much, it went straight down like suits in the 60s. It changed with the times. Pan Am, in fact, didn't actually even introduce above the knee skirts until 1971. And then you had more color choices. You could either do super jet blue or galaxy gold, and these were made by designer Frank Smith. And they switched to bowler style hats, which are kind of silly but cute. But they also had the option to wear a cute jumper dress instead of a suit, and I'm going to put pictures of all of these somewhere. Maybe with these will have to be several Instagram posts.
Yes. Is there a place we can find these images?
Yes, so in the show notes I'll put a link to, I've found a couple resources with a lot of good pictures of flight attendant uniforms through the ages, and then we'll also do corresponding Facebook posts for those of you who want us to do the research for you. Happy to do it.
Yes.
But also, now that we're getting closer to modern times, we cannot gloss over the incredible piece of mid-century design of the Pan Am Terminal, which was also known as the Pan Am Worldport. It was the designated Pan Am Terminal at JFK Airport in New York, and it was an amazing building.
Yes, this is amazing. This is a great building. It was famous for its 4-acre flying saucer roof, projecting out from the outer columns of the terminal. And this terminal was designed to allow for aircraft to be parked under this overhanging roof. And the idea here is that the overhang sheltered passengers as they boarded the aircraft by stairs or by uncovered bridges. Marketing brochures promoted it as the Jet Age terminal that brought the plane to the passenger. The Pan Am Terminal was designed by two groups of architects as a showcase for international jet travel. And it even included places like the Panorama Room, a dining room with a view of the entire concourse, and the Clipper Hall Museum of Pan Am history. In 1971, the terminal was expanded to accommodate the large Boeing 747 and renamed the Pan Am Worldport. Unfortunately, the operation of Worldport changed hands after Pan Am declared bankruptcy in 1991. Delta Airlines acquired many of Pan Am's assets, including the lease on Worldport, which then became known just simply as Terminal 3.
Which is so boring.
Boring. The final departure from Terminal 3 was Delta Airlines Flight 268, a Boeing 747 to Tel Aviv, departed on May 23, 2013. The terminal ceased operations on the next day, 53 years to the day from when it opened.
So throughout the years, several preservation groups campaigned to save the building and have it nominated by the New York State Historic Preservation Office as a historic place. But unfortunately, the Historic Preservation Office revoked the building's eligibility for the National Register of Historic Places, claiming that the building had lost significant historic integrity due to excessive modifications. Which, I get, they have to be kind of strict about that sort of thing, but also that sucks.
I feel like in this case, and I realize this could be argued for many buildings that go through the same, unfortunate not getting the designation, you really should have taken the history of the building into account. Yes, it's gone through changes, but the history of Pan Am is so important that to do away with this building is like saying this part of history doesn't matter. And as a history teacher, I cannot get behind that.
Yeah, it was awful. The preservation campaign was ultimately unsuccessful, and the demolition of the flying saucer roof was completed on November 22nd, 2013. Demolition work on the remainder of the terminal completed in summer 2014.
Man, I could just mope around the whole time. Or we can talk about how we've connected to it today. So we've kind of covered throughout the episode how Pan Am influenced our aviation experiences today, but a quick rundown. Basically, Pan Am pioneered international air travel. It established the transatlantic and transpacific routes, connecting continents and fostering global travel. They also helped mark the beginning of globalization we experience today, which we often take for granted. Like, we can literally hop on a plane and in less than 12 hours be across the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that is thanks to Pan Am. They also helped introduce jet planes and the jet age. So through the adoption of the Boeing 707 and then later the 747, Pan Am revolutionized long-distance air travel with increased speed and efficiency. And this paved the way for the modern era of air travel, where jetliners are the standard.
Indeed, we have a lot we can thank Pan Am for. And hopefully this episode worked as an appetizer to get all of you listeners excited about our interview with Tom Betty. He is such an interesting guy and has a wealth of knowledge about not just Pan Am, but just mid-century air travel and vintage air travel in general, and we cannot wait to share that conversation with you, so stay tuned.
Yes. And now that we've caught up to the present, talking about the future episodes, it is time for our etiquette segment. So, Jackie, what do we have for today?
So we touched on this slightly earlier, but it's some really interesting stuff. I found this ad. I'm not really sure if it was marketing for United Airlines or if it was marketing for this model and air career school that seemed to sponsor the ad. But from 1957, it's basically stewardess grooming tips for that likable look. So it could have also been like a self-help thing for just women reading. It was created by United Airlines for Family Circle magazine. So it could have just been for women to be like, if you want to look like a flight attendant and be as glamorous as they are, here are the rules that you would apply to your life also. So this is barely etiquette, but it's something. So I'm guessing that most of these tips also applied to, assuming that these were standards that flight attendants had to uphold, I'm guessing that these were also for their daily life as well, because a lot of it references clothing choices that they wouldn't have any control over while they were actually working because they had uniforms. So I'm guessing that they basically had to represent the company even when they were off the clock. So this is just sort of, if you want to be as glamorous as a Pan Am flight attendant or a flight attendant from the 50s and 60s, you would adhere to these grooming tips. So you keep your hair clean and shining, have a soft feminine hairstyle, skin soft and smooth, delicate, flattering makeup, teeth clean and healthy, voice well modulated, modest, tasteful clothing, a minimum of jewelry, hat and gloves for streetwear, a well-fitted girdle, fresh lingerie daily, hemlines of a becoming length, body skin fresh and clean, a light pleasing fragrance, daily use of deodorant, armpits hair-free, hands soft and manicured, legs smooth and free of hair, and feet well groomed and well shod. Which, I mean, they have no choice what shoes. Probably they assign them shoes in their uniforms as well. But most of these are just good hygiene tips, and then some of them are very silly, like, how do they know if their armpits are hair-free? They wear long-sleeve shirts and jackets. But anyway. I should mention, I kind of did in a little bit in the intro, is that this ad, or whatever it is, was sponsored by the Grace Downs Model and Air Career School, which is apparently some sort of national school. But I thought it was really interesting that it was a school you go to for both modeling and for careers as flight attendants. So that explains these, like, very, very high beauty standards. But if you thought that was bad, the taboos that they list in a tiny little box in the corner, which is basically the opposite of everything on their grooming tips list. So things that you cannot do if you were to attend the school or presumably to be a successful flight attendant.
They are very strict, and I don't know how I feel, because as a guy, if someone told me my job description included all these things, I would be like, I'm sorry, what?
I know, I'm torn on it because it is really, really strict and very limiting, and they did a lot of changes later than our time period. There's a really interesting interview on the Pan Am podcast, actually, with a woman who just did a huge deep dive on flight attendants in the 60s and 70s and what the standards were like and how they broke that down. And you age out of this job also at 35.
I also feel like I would have been a great flight attendant.
I mean, it's not too late.
I'm past their age.
Yeah, it does seem like even now something that's better when you're young and unencumbered, because you're on call a lot. You're gone for like 2 weeks at a time. Most of the time you're like sleeping in group housing, like between flights, because you can't really like maintain a house. Like it's a very like on the go lifestyle. And
I'd be the bougie person who would be like, "Oh, you're putting me in this hotel? No, I'll pay the difference." And then I would have no money because I would pay the difference in everywhere.
It is a very different and interesting lifestyle even now, but it was really, really strict back in. Again, this list is from 1957. So I suppose just from our conversation afterwards that we don't approve of this etiquette tip. Is this one of the rare times where it does not get the stamp?
I don't approve as this being the standard for 2025. I understand that it's apt for the mid 20th. And I'm okay with that, because I'm not okay with it. I understand it. I let it slide because this is how the mid-century was, for better or for worse.
Yes, I agree with you completely. I think that these are, other than the general hygiene tips, I think all of this is outrageous. So I'm glad that we got past that.
Yeah. But it looks like we have landed the plane, which is very apt for today. The only thing that would make it even better would be if we had said that we have landed the Jet Clipper. You may have noticed that we call the Pan Am airplanes by their names, right? Because all planes were called Clippers and then had original names. And I really wish we still did this, because I think it's really cool.
I do too.
Either way, thank you guys for listening today. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the show and tell a friend.
You can also follow us on YouTube and Instagram at MCL Podcast. Instagram is the best place to send us feedback and episode suggestions. You can send us a DM anytime. And you can also contact us through our new Send Us a Text Message feature right here in the show notes.
Yeah, so send us some fan mail. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Please subscribe, tell your friends, and leave a review. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at MCL Podcast. See you next Friday.